Stop guilting us. We are all at your sister Chloe's housewarming party. Not everything in this world revolves around your son's little drama. That was the exact text message my mother sent me on the very afternoon my 9-year-old son, Leo, finally rang the hospital bell, marking the end of his grueling 11-month battle with leukemia. What she did not realize at that moment, however, was that just a few hours later, a leaked photograph would permanently put an end to her 11,200 lie and plunge her into an absolute legal nightmare from which she could never manipulate her way out. Hi, my name is Maya. If you are watching this, please drop a comment and let me know where you are tuning in from. But right now, I need you to listen closely as I tell you exactly how I personally struck the match that burned my mother's fake, picture-perfect stage to the ground. To truly understand the sheer cruelty of that text message, you have to understand the gravity of that morning. The end-of-treatment bell at the pediatric oncology ward is a heavy brass fixture bolted to the wall near the infusion bays. For 334 agonizing days, my son had stared at that bell. During his sickest weeks, he asked me if the kids who rang it ever came back. I told him they came back to say hello to the nurses, and he quietly whispered that he wanted to be one of those kids. That was the only plan: beat cancer, ring the bell, say thank you to the people who kept him alive. His final round of chemotherapy fell on a Saturday. By some twisted stroke of fate, it shared a calendar square with my younger sister, Chloe's lavish housewarming party, when I woke up from the miserable plastic fold-out hospital chair I had practically lived in for a year. Leo was already dressed. He sat at the edge of his bed, holding a piece of cardboard on his lap, tracing his fingers over the letters he had written the night before. The sign, written in crooked, blue marker capitals, read, "I beat it. Grandma, are you coming?" Hai had carefully peeled a shiny gold star sticker from his medical reward chart and pressed it firmly into the top corner. Leo is a profoundly quiet soul. He draws instead of talking. When the doctors asked him to rate his pain, he would draw a tiny sad face, because saying a high number out loud felt like complaining. For 11 months, he had been the most stoic person in every room full of terrified adults. Yet, this sweet boy had meticulously crafted a sign to ask his grandmother one direct question. When the nurse handed him the rope, he pulled it hard, the triumphant sound echoing down the sterile hallway. Then, he looked at me, smiled weakly, and pulled it a second time, softer, as if that chime was a private victory just for the two of us. The nurses clapped. A stranger in the waiting room wiped her tears, but my mother was not there. When we got back to our small apartment, Leo stood by the kitchen counter, clutching his sign. "Send it to her now, Mom," he urged, his eyes full of desperate hope. I took a picture of my brave, bald boy holding his cardboard sign and sent it to the family group chat. I typed a soft caption. "He did it. He wants to know if you are on your way," for 90 seconds. I naively hoped this would be the moment that cracked her cold heart open. Instead, 3 typing dots appeared. Then, her response: "Stop guilting us. We are all at your sister Chloe's housewarming party. Not everything in this world revolves around your son's little drama." Leo couldn't see the screen, but after a year of sickness, he had become an expert at reading my face. "Is she coming, Mom?" he asked softly. I swallowed the massive lump in my throat, crouched down to his eye level, and lied to protect his fragile heart. "Grandma is super busy with Aunt Chloe's thing today, buddy. But you and me, we are going to celebrate just the two of us. It will be amazing, I promise." Leo nodded. He looked at his sign, gently placed it face down on the kitchen table to protect the gold star, and turned away far too quickly, the unmistakable reaction of a child trying to hide his tears so his mother wouldn't have to worry. In that suffocating silence, watching my son swallow his heartbreak, something inside me finally snapped. Before I continue, I need to pause for a moment. If you are listening to this, I know exactly what some of you are thinking. You are probably frustrated with me. You might even be typing in the comments, calling me a coward, a pushover, or a doormat. You are wondering how any self-respecting mother could just swallow a text message that cruel and do absolutely nothing to defend her child. If this were any normal situation, you would be absolutely right to judge me. But I need you to understand the horrifying reality of a pediatric oncology ward. When your child's immune system is completely obliterated by aggressive chemotherapy, the very air he breathes becomes a matter of life and death. The doctors drilled it into me that the physical environment must be utterly sanitized. But what people don't realize is that the emotional environment has to be just as sterile. Children are profound emotional sponges. A 9-year-old fighting for his life feels everything his mother feels. The doctors warned me early on that emotional chaos is a luxury we could not afford. A sudden outburst of anger, a screaming match over the phone, or the heavy energy of a mother losing her mind over family drama can cause a sick child's heart rate to spike dangerously. It induces a surge of adrenaline and panic in a fragile body wasting precious energy just to survive until the next sunrise. I did not stay silent because I was a coward. I stayed silent because my rage had to wait in line behind my son's survival. I had to build a perfectly sterile emotional bubble where the only things allowed inside were hope, calm, and unwavering safety, my righteous anger, my desperate need for fairness, and my urge to scream at my mother. All of that had to wait. I traded my own dignity for his steady pulse. I absorbed the blows so he wouldn't have to. And I would make that exact same trade 1,000,000 times over. That silence, however, was deafeningly lonely. For 11 brutal months, my existence was reduced to bone-deep exhaustion during the day. I worked grueling shifts as a nursing assistant just to keep the lights on and pay the crippling medical copays. When my shift ended, I drove straight to Riverside Hospital to morph into a full-time caregiver. My nights were spent contorted in a bruised purple, hard plastic fold-out chair. I spent a year learning how to sleep sitting upright, my hand resting gently on Leo's blanket so I would wake instantly if his fever spiked. My parents lived exactly 40 minutes away, yet, during those 334 days, their excuses arrived like a predictable monthly subscription. I just can't bear to see him looking so sick. Maya, you know how my blood pressure spikes. My mother would sigh dramatically. The doctors said he shouldn't have too many visitors anyway, right? The doctors never said that. But eventually, I stopped correcting her. My father offered even less, treating his grandson's cancer battle with a generic thumbs-up emoji. In nearly a year, neither of them crossed the sliding glass doors of that hospital. Instead of an actual support system, I had keepsakes every admission. The nurses clasped a paper caregiver band around my wrist every discharge. I snipped it off and tossed it into a wooden drawer in my kitchen. By the time Leo rang that brass bell, there were exactly 11 of them. 11 faded, crinkled paper bands printed with my name, Leo's name, and a date. They were undeniable pieces of physical proof of exactly who had shown up. They were the silent witnesses to who had held the vomit basin at 3:00 a.m. and who whispered that everything would be okay while the world slept. If you pulled the hospital's security logs, you would find my name hundreds of times. You would find my mother's name exactly 0 times. I thought those wristbands were just unfiled grief. I had no idea they were about to become the most powerful weapon I had ever wielded. The fragile peace I constructed for Leo that Saturday afternoon lasted precisely until 9:00 p.m., after Leo drifted off to sleep. I stood alone in my dark kitchen. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a Facebook notification. Helen, an older, painfully sweet woman from my parents' church who photographed everything, had tagged our extended family in a post. Because Helen was one of those aggressively cheerful honorary aunts. She posted the photo with a caption comically unaware of its own cruelty. "Beatrice, you are the true heart and rock of this family. What an incredibly difficult journey you have survived." I tapped the notification, expecting a blurry shot of Chloe's new kitchen. Instead, the blood in my veins ran cold. It was my mother, Beatrice. She was standing at the center of Chloe's massive, newly renovated great room, bathed in warm, expensive lighting, dressed in an elegant evening gown. She held a crystal wine glass mid-toast. Her mouth was open in a radiant laugh. She looked vibrant, healthy, and completely untouched by the supposed blood pressure issues that prevented her from stepping foot inside the hospital. But it was not her glowing appearance that made me drop my phone. Directly behind her, propped prominently on a decorative wooden easel where every guest would be forced to look at it, was a sign. It wasn't Leo's crooked cardboard sign. It was a professionally printed, glossy poster board. It read, "Thank you everyone for accompanying me through the journey of caring for my grandson with cancer." My hands shook as I picked the phone back up and zoomed in. Taped carefully to the bottom corner of that beautiful sign was a photograph of my son. He was entirely bald, hooked up to an IV pole during his absolute worst cycle of chemotherapy. It was a deeply private, heartbreaking photo that I had sent exclusively to my mother months ago, desperately hoping to evoke a shred of maternal sympathy. She had taken that private moment of my son's profound suffering and used it as cheap set dressing to elevate her own performative toast about a painful journey she entirely fabricated. Let me be very clear. Her only agonizing journey had been a 40-minute drive to a catered housewarming party. That was the absolute extent of her medical trauma. For 11 grueling months, she diligently kept 2 distinct rooms entirely separate. There was the room where she played the tragic martyr grandmother to her church friends, soaking up their pity and applause. And then there was the room where I actually lived, a grim hospital ward she never visited. With a single innocent click, Helen had accidentally taken a sledgehammer to the wall, separating those 2 worlds, dragging my mother's monstrous charade directly into the light. Before my brain could process the sheer audacity, my phone vibrated violently. The caller ID flashed. "Mom," I answered, but I did not say a word. Through the receiver, I heard the muffled thumping bass of the party music. "Maya," she hissed, her voice thick with fake, panicky tears. "Maya, please, that photo Helen posted. You know I've been there for him in spirit. You have to tell them that. Please don't blow this out of proportion and make me look like a monster in front of everyone." I listened to her sob, realizing with piercing clarity what she was actually crying about. She wasn't crying out of guilt. She was crying because her flawless mask had slipped, and she desperately needed her reliable doormat daughter to help glue it back on. For 40 years, whenever my mother cried, my immediate trauma response was to scramble to comfort her, to shrink myself down. But that night, staring at my son's discarded cardboard sign, that reflex vanished entirely. "Do what, Mom?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Just tell them I was there for you. Fix it," she pleaded. I took a deep breath, and for the very first time in my 40 years of existence, I set a boundary she could not cross. "Understood," I said, my voice like ice. And then I hung up the phone. The boundary was officially drawn. The fallout from hanging up on my mother did not begin with a screaming match. It started quietly the next morning with a text message about baked pasta. It was Sunday, around 10:00 a.m. Leo was meticulously drawing a picture of a dog he desperately wanted us to adopt, completely oblivious to the silent war that had ignited the night before. I was still processing the sheer audacity of my mother's housewarming photo when my phone chimed. It was a message from Sarah, who ran the volunteer meal train ministry at my parents' church. "Hi, Maya. So wonderful to hear Leo finally rang the bell. By the way, how did he like the lasagna I made yesterday? The congregation has loved cooking for your mom to bring to you guys all year. We pray the meals have brought you some comfort." I stood frozen in the middle of my small kitchen. We loved cooking for your mom to bring to you guys all year. In 11 months, I had not received a single tray of lasagna, a container of soup, or even a loaf of bread. I had survived on stale hospital cafeteria crackers and cheap instant ramen. I assumed that because I was no longer an active member of that church. I was off their radar, but there had been a map of care this entire time, and a massive amount of food had been traveling along it. It just never reached my door. Hands trembling slightly, I stepped out onto my tiny balcony and called Sarah. I kept my voice incredibly level and calm. "Hi, Sarah. I wanted to call and thank you properly. Could you remind me exactly how many meals the church organized for us?" With genuine pride, she told me that 40 different families had cooked hot dinners over the span of a year. "That is so beautiful, Sarah," I said. "But I am a bit confused. Where exactly were these meals being dropped off?" "Oh, we gave everything directly to your mother, Beatrice." "Of course," Sarah replied smoothly. Then, her cheerful tone suddenly shifted into something soft and deeply apologetic. "Maya, I just want you to know how much we've been praying for your mental state. Your mother told us everything. She stood up in front of the entire parish last summer and cried so hard. She explained how the divorce had completely shattered your reality, and how Leo's diagnosis had finally pushed you over the edge." I gripped the cold metal railing of my balcony. "What exactly did my mother say, Sarah?" "Through the phone," Sarah began to gently cry. "She told us you were suffering from severe, clinical depression, that you were experiencing intense paranoia and had even threatened to harm yourself. Beatrice begged us on her knees to never text you, never call you, and absolutely never show up at your apartment." The pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together. "She said unannounced contact might trigger a catastrophic mental breakdown," Sarah sobbed. "She said it was critical for your safety that we hand all the food and donations directly to her, so she could discreetly bring them to you without overwhelming you. We just wanted to respect a desperate mother trying to save her mentally fragile daughter." I didn't scream. A suffocating, terrifying chill washed over my entire body. This was a calculated, masterful psychological assassination. My mother hadn't just been neglectful, she had orchestrated a flawless gaslighting campaign. In order to collect the glory, the casseroles, and the public sympathy without ever having to actually do the grueling work of caregiving. She needed a scapegoat. She needed me to be a broken, suicidal, unfit mother so she could heroically step in as the savior. By convincing an entire community that I was dangerously unstable, she successfully built an impenetrable firewall around me, ensuring no one would ever reach out to check her story. She didn't just leave me alone in the dark, she systematically stole my entire village. She weaponized my solitude, starving me of support while feasting on the charity meant for my dying son. I thanked Sarah softly and ended the call. The time for keeping the peace was officially over. The horrifying revelation of the stolen meals and my fabricated mental breakdown was only the first loose thread. During my phone call with Sarah, she had casually dropped another word that was ringing in my ears like a blaring siren. Donations! My intuition told me there was more to uncover. I walked back inside, sat down across from Leo, and opened my laptop. My hands were trembling with a cold, hyper-focused adrenaline. I typed my mother's name and the word fundraiser into the search engine. It took less than 3 seconds for a GoFundMe campaign to populate. It was public, highly active, and had been running seamlessly for 10 agonizing months. At the top of the page was the exact same photograph of Leo from the easel at the housewarming party. The organizer was explicitly listed as Beatrice. The total amount raised sat at $8,900. Combined with the $2,300 in gift cards Sarah had mentioned, my mother had collected roughly $11,200. Every single penny had been raised using my dying son's face, and not a single cent had ever reached our household. If you know how crowdfunding platforms operate, you might wonder how she pulled this off without getting flagged for fraud. GoFundMe has strict protocols. If a campaign is titled "Pay for Leo's Hospital Bills," the platform will freeze the funds and demand official hospital invoices and the legal guardian's consent. My mother, possessing a terrifyingly sharp intelligence for manipulation, knew exactly how to bypass the system. She had named it Income Replacement Support for Grandmother Stepping Up as Primary Cancer Caregiver. It was a masterclass in exploiting legal loopholes. She wasn't technically raising money to pay the hospital. She was legally raising money to compensate herself. She claimed she had to drastically reduce her working hours to physically care for her terminally ill grandson and her mentally unstable daughter. Because the funds were framed as personal income support, the platform allowed the money to flow effortlessly into her private checking account. I read through all 26 detailed updates. Every single entry was about her suffering. Another exhausting week sleeping in this brutal hospital chair. But God gives me strength, she wrote in October. October, that was the month Leo's fever had spiked to 104 degrees at 2 a.m. That was the night I frantically begged her to come to the hospital, and she responded by sending a 20-second cheerful voice note from her warm bed. She had hijacked my horrific, sleepless nights and sold them on the internet as her own tragedy. Strangers read her fiction, wept, and reached for their wallets. I opened a second browser window and logged into my bank account. I pulled up my credit card statement. It was a suffocating sea of angry red numbers. For nearly a year, I had paid every exorbitant medical copay and expensive prescription using my meager paychecks and a maxed-out credit card. I had spent countless nights desperately doing the math, terrified I wouldn't have enough money to buy Leo's vital medications. And on those exact same nights, just 40 minutes away, my mother watched her fraudulent bank account grow fatter. The diabolical contrast between her profitable green numbers built on lies and my desperate red debt built on reality transcended anger. I calmly took screenshots of every single update on her GoFundMe page. I printed them out, along with my maxed-out credit card statements and Sarah's text messages. I walked over to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the 11 faded hospital wristbands. I carefully placed everything into a thick manila envelope. I was going to war. Armed with the thick manila envelope of damning evidence, I was sitting at my kitchen table, calculating my next legal move, when my phone buzzed. The name flashing on the screen made me freeze. It was my younger sister, Chloe. "I need to see you right now, in person. I am parked at the grocery store 3 blocks from your apartment. Please come." In the deeply toxic hierarchy of our family, Chloe and I did not just meet up. She had always been the undisputed golden child. Since the day she was born, our mother had treated love as a strictly limited resource, and it had effortlessly flowed entirely toward her. Chloe had been the radiant sun our parents orbited around, while I was simply the designated shock absorber, expected to quietly manage the fallout of everyone else's emotions. She had never been forced to look too closely at the ugliness of our mother's manipulation, mostly because looking away was a luxurious privilege Beatrice had afforded her. So, as I grabbed my keys and drove the 3 short blocks, my guard was fully up. I assumed my mother had panicked and dispatched Chloe to play her usual role as the family peacekeeper. I expected my sister to lecture me, to demand that I drop my attitude, and to guilt-trip me into smoothing everything over so the family's perfect facade wouldn't crack over a leaked Facebook photo. When I pulled my beat-up sedan into the desolate parking lot, Chloe's sleek SUV was already there. But instead of waiting for me to walk over to her, she immediately opened her door, sprinted across the cold asphalt, and threw herself into the passenger seat of my car. The moment she closed the door, I realized how incredibly wrong my assumptions had been. Chloe did not look like the radiant hostess from the housewarming photo. She looked utterly hollowed out. Her face was deathly pale. Her eyes were severely bloodshot from crying, and her hands were physically shaking as she clutched a crumpled piece of paper against her chest. She didn't offer a greeting. She didn't try to defend our mother. Instead, she practically shoved the crumpled paper into my lap. "Look at it, Maya. Look at the account numbers," she choked out, her voice breaking completely. I carefully unfolded the paper. It was a printed bank transaction receipt for a massive furniture and home improvement purchase. I recognized the items immediately. The custom Italian leather sectional sofa in my new living room. The smart heating system they just installed for the housewarming. Chloe sobbed, burying her face in her trembling hands. Mom made this huge, dramatic show of buying them for me as a grand housewarming gift. She told everyone how proud she was of my new house. But Maya, yesterday, I was organizing my financial documents and I saw the routing number she used to wire the money directly to the contractor. Chloe looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, her expression a mix of sheer horror and profound disgust. "It's the exact same routing number linked to that GoFundMe page she set up. The one with Leo's picture on it," she whispered. "Maya, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. She bought my luxury sofa and my heating system using the cancer fund meant for your dying child. She took the blood, sweat, and absolute misery of my 9-year-old nephew, and she draped it over my living room just so she could show off to her friends. I am so sick to my stomach, I can't even stand to walk into my own house. I feel absolutely disgusted with myself." I stared at the receipt, the final, devastating piece of the puzzle falling into place. My mother hadn't just hoarded the money out of pure greed. She had literally stolen from her sick grandson to fund the lavish lifestyle of her favorite daughter, ensuring her own status as the ultimate, generous matriarch. I looked over at Chloe. For 40 years. The wedge our mother had driven between us had felt insurmountable, but sitting in this sterile parking lot, watching the golden child voluntarily step off her pedestal and shatter her own privilege, I felt a sudden, fierce wave of sisterly solidarity. She wasn't an accomplice, she was just another prop in Beatrice's sick play. "I know you didn't know, Chloe," I said softly. Chloe wiped her eyes fiercely and pulled out her phone. "There's a family group chat. Maya, the one you aren't allowed in, because Mom told everyone you were too mentally unstable to handle family chatter." Without another word, Chloe unlocked her screen and hit the airdrop button. My phone buzzed in my lap. "I am sending you every single screenshot," Chloe said, her voice hardening with a newfound, steely resolve. "Every message where she called you crazy. Every message where she claimed you wouldn't let her see Leo. And the message she sent last night, 6 minutes before she called you crying, ordering everyone to force Helen to delete that housewarming photo before you saw it and ruined everything." I watched as dozens of screenshots populated into my photo gallery. It was the ultimate, irrefutable proof of her malicious intent. "I've had the easy, comfortable seat in this family my entire life, Maya," Chloe said quietly, looking me dead in the eye. "And I am officially done sitting in it. Take these, burn her stage down to the ground, and let me help you light the match." For the first time in my life, I didn't have to fight my battles completely alone. My sister had finally crossed the battle lines, and together we were about to end our mother's reign for good. Armed with Chloe's damning digital evidence, Sarah's meal train spreadsheet, my maxed-out credit card statements, and the luxury furniture receipt, I finally had everything I needed. The final reckoning did not take place in a courtroom. It happened in a setting far more devastating for a woman like my mother, the Community Fellowship Hall of Grace Fellowship Church. Following Sarah's deeply troubled report to the church leadership, the pastor quietly requested a private meeting on Tuesday evening, clarify some confusing financial discrepancies. When I pushed open the double doors of the drab, fluorescent-lit basement room, clutching my thick manila envelope, there were about a dozen people seated around a long folding table. The pastor, Sarah, a few of the core volunteers who had cooked the meals, and, of course, my parents. The moment I stepped into the room, Beatrice instantly launched into her performance. She sprang up from her metal folding chair, clutching a crumpled tissue to her chest, her face contorted in a theatrical mask of wounded agony. "Pastor, please, you shouldn't have brought her here," Beatrice cried out, pointing a trembling finger at me as if I were a physical threat. "I warned you about her mental state. This is exactly the kind of paranoid episode I've been trying to protect her from. Maya, sweetheart, you are clearly unwell. Let's go home before you embarrass yourself and ruin the family." She turned desperately toward my father, Richard, who was sitting silently in his usual state of passive compliance. "Richard, tell them how delusional she's been since the divorce. Defend your wife." Normally, this is the exact moment the scapegoat daughter loses her temper. For 40 years, I had always engaged with her chaos. I had argued, cried, and desperately tried to defend myself against her lies, ultimately playing right into the narrative that I was hysterical and unstable. But that night, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say a single word in my own defense. I knew that arguing was simply playing her game on her turf. Instead, I walked calmly to the center of the folding table and opened the manila envelope. I moved with the cold, precise efficiency of an executioner. Without breaking eye contact with my mother, I began to lay the documents out across the table. First, Sarah's color-coded meal train spreadsheet, with the words "delivered directly to Beatrice" highlighted. Next, I placed the printed pages of the GoFundMe campaign, showing the $8,900 total sitting comfortably under Leo's bald, suffering face. Then came the red, suffocating reality of my own maxed-out credit card statements and the towering stack of unpaid hospital bills. Beside that, I placed the bank routing receipt Chloe had given me, the undeniable proof that the cancer funds had purchased a luxury Italian leather sofa. Finally, I reached into the envelope one last time. I pulled out the 11 faded, crinkled paper hospital wristbands. I fanned them out slowly, deliberately. Across the very center of the table, 11 bands, 11 proofs of life. The hospital keeps strict security logs of everyone who badges in and out of the pediatric oncology unit, I said, my voice eerily calm, echoing in the dead silence of the room. If you pull those logs, you will find my name hundreds of times. You will find Beatrice's name exactly 0 times. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. The pastor stared at the GoFundMe prints, his face turning pale. The room did not need a lengthy speech from me. The paper trail spoke louder than my mother's hysterics ever could. You could physically feel the entire room turning against her, the collective realization crashing down like a tidal wave. My mother's face flushed a panicked, violently ugly shade of red. She lunged forward, slamming her hands on the table. "She's twisting everything. She's an ungrateful, jealous liar. Richard, do something. Shut her down." She reached for him like a light switch in the dark, expecting him to be right where she had always kept him. But my father didn't move to back her up. I was staring down at the table. He was looking at the luxury sofa receipt. He was looking at the $11,200 raised in his grandson's name. And most of all, he was staring at the 11 hospital wristbands. My father was a deeply flawed, cowardly man who had chosen the path of least resistance for 4 decades. But watching him at that table, I realized he hadn't been the architect of this evil. He had been her very first victim. She had fed him a sanitized, comfortable version of my mental illness, so he wouldn't have to face the ugly reality of her neglect. When my father finally spoke, he didn't look at the pastor. He looked directly at his wife, and his hands were physically trembling. "You told me she explicitly banned us from the hospital," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You told me Leo was doing perfectly fine. You told me there was absolutely no fundraiser. Beatrice, where did $11,000 go?" "Richard, please," she stammered, the terror finally breaking through her voice. I stepped forward, leaning over the table to look my mother dead in the eyes. It was time to deliver the final blow. "I am not calling the police tonight. Mom," I said, my voice dripping with absolute ice. "Not because I care about your pathetic reputation, but because I refuse to let my 9-year-old son's face end up on the evening news attached to a fraud scandal." She let out a shaky breath, mistakenly thinking she was off the hook. I immediately cut her off. "But you need to listen to me very carefully," I continued, my tone lowering into a lethal threat. "Using photographs of a minor to solicit financial donations under false pretenses, without the legal guardian's consent, is a federal crime. It is called wire fraud. You have exactly 48 hours to wire the entire $11,200 into a locked educational trust fund under Leo's name. If you are missing so much as a single penny by Thursday morning, This entire manila envelope goes directly to my lawyer, who will hand-deliver it to the local police department and the IRS. My mother stumbled backward, physically reeling as if she had been slapped, before she could even attempt to formulate a manipulative response. My father stood up. The 40-year spell had completely shattered. "Don't bother trying to figure out how to wire it," Richard said, his voice terrifyingly hollow. He pulled out his cell phone. "I am calling the bank right now to completely freeze our joint checking and retirement accounts. I am going to withdraw from my own personal pension tomorrow morning to pay my grandson back for the money you stole." My father looked at the woman he had blindly defended his entire life with utter, unadulterated disgust. "And Beatrice," he added softly, "pack your bags tonight. I want you completely out of my house by tomorrow morning." The room was dead silent. The untouchable martyr. Grandmother had been completely eradicated. The saint was dead. Her perfect facade was shattered, and her stage had burned to ashes. 2 weeks later, at the very end of April, when the world was finally turning warm and green again, we threw a real party for Leo. It wasn't held in a lavish, professionally decorated great room, and there were absolutely no performative toasts about painful journeys. It was held in Sarah's modest, sun-drenched backyard, simply because she and the other church volunteers had adamantly insisted on hosting it. The guest list was small but profoundly significant. Around 30 people showed up, and not a single one was there out of social obligation. These were the real ones. They were the women from Grace Fellowship's meal train, an army of mothers who had spent an entire year lovingly cooking hot dinners for a dying little boy they had never even met, and who were finally getting the chance to watch him smile. Even Leo's favorite charge nurse from the pediatric oncology unit came straight from a grueling 12-hour shift, still wearing her faded blue scrubs. When Leo saw her walk through the wooden gate, he let out a joyful, unrestrained squeal. I hadn't heard him make in a year, running over to wrap his thin arms around her waist. Just as Sarah brought out a massive chocolate cake, carrying not 9 candles for his age, but 11, one for every brutal month of chemotherapy he had survived, the backyard gate creaked open one last time. It was my father, Richard. He arrived entirely alone. There was no Beatrice trailing behind him to dictate the narrative. He hovered awkwardly at the edge of the vibrant, laughing crowd, his shoulders slumped, looking like a deeply flawed man who wasn't entirely sure if he had earned the right to step onto the grass. But his hands weren't empty. Tucked carefully against his chest was a heavy wooden frame. I had gone back to my apartment, retrieved Leo's original, crooked cardboard sign, the one that read, "I beat it. Grandma, are you coming?" and had it professionally preserved behind anti-glare glass to protect the blue marker and the shiny gold star. Forever. He walked slowly over to the picnic table, crouched down to my son's eye level exactly as I had done 2 weeks prior, and handed him the frame. "I owe you about 100 hospital visits, Leo," my father said, his voice raw with a heavy, unvarnished grief. "I can't magically undo that. I won't ever insult you by pretending that I can. But I am here right now, and I will be here every single Sunday from now on, if you will let me." My son is a remarkably careful person. A year of fighting for his life had taught him not to blindly hand out his trust simply because an adult demanded it. He looked at my father for a long, heavy moment. Then, he looked at the 11 flickering candles on the chocolate cake. "You can help me blow out the candles, Grandpa," Leo whispered softly. It wasn't instant forgiveness, A 9-year-old child doesn't possess the emotional machinery to instantly absolve a lifetime of cowardly neglect. It was something much simpler and infinitely wiser. It was a brave boy offering a broken man a very small, very specific job, as a way of saying, you can start right here, and we will see. Later, as the golden afternoon sun began to dip and the party was quietly winding down, Leo pulled gently on my sleeve. He looked around the bustling backyard, his big, thoughtful eyes taking in the crowd of nurses, neighbors, and volunteers who were laughing and packing up the food. "Mom," he whispered, leaning his head against my hip. "Grandma didn't come today either. So, are all these aunts and uncles our family now?" It was the question I had been preparing for, the exact moment I knew would define how he viewed love for the rest of his life. I didn't want to sugarcoat the pain of rejection, but I also refused to let him carry the burden of a broken family tree. I crouched down on the grass, wrapped my arms tightly around his small, cancer-free body, and delivered the truest piece of wisdom I possessed. "Yes, my sweet boy, they are," I said, my voice fiercely steady as I looked directly into his bright eyes. "Listen to me very carefully. Leo, blood only gives us relatives. But genuine sincerity is what creates a family. Family is the exhausted nurse who stayed up with you at 3 in the morning. It is the people who step up when there are no cameras around, and absolutely no photos to show off for applause." I brushed a stray tear from his cheek and kissed his forehead. You never, ever have to endure pain in silence, or shrink yourself down to fight for love. When your blood relatives turn their backs on you, you have the absolute right to go out into the world and build a village of your very own. Leo absorbed those words with the profound, quiet gravity he applied to everything. He nodded slowly, a radiant, genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. Then, without a word, he jogged over to the craft table, grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and a blue marker, and began to draw. When we finally got home that night, he didn't ask about his grandmother ever again. Instead, he took the piece of paper he had written on at the party and proudly stuck it to the center of our kitchen refrigerator with a magnet. In the top corner, he had meticulously drawn a second, vibrant gold star, and in his crooked, beautiful blue handwriting, my son had written his final truth: "I beat it, and my village came." Surviving a year on the fragile boundary between life and death taught me one undeniable truth. Fake kindness will always demand a brightly lit stage, an audience, and a camera, but genuine love only ever requires presence. You cannot choose the parents who brought you into this world, and you are not obligated to protect the toxic narratives they spin to make themselves comfortable. But you do possess the absolute power to choose exactly who gets a seat at the dinner table of your life. To everyone watching this video right now, I know I am not the only one. If you have ever been the scapegoat of your family, if you were the one who silently carried the heavy, agonizing burden of trauma in the dark, only to watch someone else proudly collect the applause out in the brightly lit hallway, or if you have ever had to painstakingly build a village of your own from scratch because the people who shared your blood betrayed you when you needed them the most, I want to hear from you. Please go down to the comments right now and type the word village or the phrase "I was there." Leave your mark. Let your words be a beacon of hope for someone scrolling past tonight, someone who feels utterly hopeless, isolated, and trapped by their own toxic family. Let them know that they have permission to draw a boundary, that they are allowed to walk away without guilt, and above all, that they are never truly alone. If this story brought you comfort or resonated with your heart, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so we can continue navigating these journeys of healing together. Thank you so much for watching. Protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.